next time you're pulling out of your garage, just drift out that motherfucker like you're rally racing, because you need to get to that restaurant as fast as possible. Don't slowly come out of your driveway. Don't warm up your engine. Just go.
As a BMW driver, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm not sure how it's related to...
You're the transporter? You're Jason Statham.
Pretty
much. Recognized
from Lidl, the discount. Jason Statham. Jason Stathamakis. Welcome back to the Stronger by Science channel. You may be wondering, why is this not an 8-hour-long podcast? And what are these people doing on camera? I'm Pac. This is Dr. Mike shaking your hand totally for the first time, not the second video we're doing in your own house. Yes, that was a wise move. We're here to talk science and lifting, more specifically, the concept of volume cycling. Now, we've seen new pieces of literature come out in the last few years on deload, still relatively preliminary stuff. We're seeing that volume increases throughout the course of a bunch of weeks may lead to more strength and hypertrophy gains, although there's still a lot to learn. And when it comes to volume cycling specifically, we're in a state in the literature where we don't have a definitive answer, but as we both know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And as somebody who has been in the game for a while and who has worked with plenty of high-level bodybuilders, is a bodybuilder themselves, and a science-based educator, I wanted to hear your take on volume cycling, some of the potential benefits, who it may be good for, some of the potential drawbacks, and areas of future research that we can potentially explore.
Yeah, definitely. I never approached volume cycling from the idea that this is something that I can do that'll get me more gains. I approached it from another perspective, and that perspective is that really pretty straightforward, two very straightforward assumptions. And these are assumptions that I have found make sense in light of my experience with other people and some theoretical literature that isn't direct, but nonetheless is may make some sense. Assumption number one is this. When you first have a different rep range, different selection of exercises, after you deload, active rest, whatever, your muscles are more sensitive to hypertrophy. And if you just do your regular volume, you're going to have days or weeks of insanely debilitating delayed onset soreness. And we do have some decent data that enough muscle damage starts to compete with the adaptive processes. The original Damas et al. Papers revealed that pretty well. And so that gives me the idea that, when we're just starting out a program, week one, we just might be able to get really awesome gains with not that many sets. Then there is a second idea, that as your body adapts to training volume, your work capacity goes up, your recovery ability goes up, and we also know that theoretically, and this is now very well confirmed, empirically, the number of sets a muscle individually can take before it reaches its top cap of how much growth you can get out of it is high. It's not 15, it's not 20 sets a week, it's like 30 or 40. Now, there's some context there, but how many studies now, Pac, show that 40 to 50 plus sets a week are superior than 20 to 30? 5, right? Like the Radielian colleagues, Schoenfeld colleagues, replication of that. There's that 52 set study. We're getting up there in numbers of studies. So if you say something to the effect of, dude, anything more than 15 sets of triceps per week is overkill, that is just no longer tenable assumption. So we know now two things. One is you can get amazing gains starting out with very little volume. And two, the top end volume, as long as you're systemically recovering and not interested in killing yourself yet, or at least walking away from the gym for a while to when your mood returns to better, we know those two things. And thus, because we know those two things, we can surmise, why don't we start our plan at something not terribly challenging that'll still get us really easy gains. And then as we are adapting and our work capacity is improving, our recovery ability is improving, 3 sets of tricep pushdowns in week 1, you're fucking sore until the next time you train triceps, 3 days later. Week 2, you're a little sore. Week 3, you just don't get sore. And you're like, okay, soreness and growth, whatever the fuck that means, who cares? I know I can recover. I know I can do 4 sets of triceps and still totally recover. And you go back to the theoretical work. On average, does 4 sets of triceps give you more growth than 3? Yes. The answer is yes. So if you can recover, you do more. Do you have to do more? Absolutely not. But if you want your best results over a 4 to 8 week period, as your body demonstrates to you, muscle by muscle and systemically, that it is now better able to recover, you give it more. And then so you start with maybe 3 sets per muscle per session. You go up to something that pushes your recovery limits towards the end, 5, 6 sets per muscle per session. And then when you get super fucking tired and your strength plateaus, you deload. You go back down to 3 or 4, or you alter exercises and rep ranges, and it's back to 3, and then you cycle back up. So it just goes in waves. And it's very important for me to say that I don't think the waves themselves are like providing an overload somehow. Like you gotta increase volume to overload. Bullshit. You overload with relative effort and how much weight there is on the bar and progressing on repetitions and load, period. But can you get literally more volume in and thus more hypertrophy if you're already more adapted to volume and you're nowhere near your recovery window? Yeah, to me the answer is yes.
And to play devil's advocate here, what would you say?
Pack, I'm the expert. I'm correct about everything. How dare you?
And that is the video, ladies and gentlemen.
All right,
thank you for watching. But to play devil's advocate, what would you say is a potential drawback of somebody saying, okay, we know from quite a bit of the literature now that it is at least an educated bet that, hey, you can do much more volume than some people say, and you can go above 20 sets per week, per muscle group per week. Obviously, organize that in a way that makes sense. Perhaps not every muscle group at 20 sets, but what would some potential drawbacks be of somebody just starting and remaining at that high end and deloading and then getting back to it, and then deloading and then getting back to it?
Totally. There are a couple of drawbacks. One is you may do so much muscle damage in the first week or two that you may get much less growth for literally doing double or triple the effort. And that's just, it make me sad. It make the bad faces appear in my head. It's kind of like if you're getting amazing results from 3 sets, you would get just a little bit better results from 6 sets, but you're like crippled at work. Why? So there's that. Not a huge downside, but like if someone tells you, look, you could be doing this in a really easier way, and eventually when it gets hard, you'll get hard. I said that wrong, but I meant it. Then that's a downside, theoretical downside, or a practical downside, I suppose. Another one is time spent in the gym. I mean, fuck, man, the first couple of weeks of training, I could get you in the gym for 45 minutes. You're like, no, man, I got to be here for an hour and a half. Okay. You get very similar results if you were just here for 45 minutes. Eventually, in weeks 5, 6, 7 before deloading, you'll have to be in the gym for a long time if you want to do the volume cycling thing. Totally fine. Another thing, and this is a bit of a bigger issue, I think. It's been shown to what I consider fairly convincingly, especially in the sport performance literature, that compared to your baseline volume or the most recent volume you did, let's say you deloaded. I mean, every new program, you don't start from just having done a psychotic program. It's some kind of rest has to be there. Deload, a week off, 2 weeks in Greece on vacation with you people. I didn't mean to say you people, though I do mean that offensively. You're going to have done a little bit less, or even just different exercises. At least from the sport performance side, we have good empirical data and very compelling, as compelling as theoretical frameworks can be, that a large spike in training volume can precipitate a higher probability of injury shortly thereafter. You're just not used to the shit. I mean, in injury models, in rehabilitative models, it's classic paradigm of if you talk to people like Dr. Quinn Hennock, DPT, who's a very
shout out,
huge injury expert. He says, again, injury's not that complicated. Like, you do too much and your body's like, fuck that, I'm tearing into pieces. And too much could be too much load, too much range of motion, more than you're used to, etc., too much velocity, but it can also be too much volume. And so when people are like, yeah, I'm taking a deload, and then next week I'm going to start with 16 sets of everything, there's a very high probability you're going to be totally fine. Sore as fuck, but totally fine. There's a small, though notable probability, you're just going to get hurt. The week after you go in there, something goes. Because you overdid it like crazy. So by starting out on the easier side, you spend less time in the gym. You get very comparable gains. I'm not saying you get the same gains, but really good gains. And, I'll do a fourth one after this. You probably reduce your probability of injury. Cumulative fatigue is a thing, especially at a systemic level. if you train for X number of weeks with 20 sets per muscle, the number of weeks you can go and still get progress until you plateau is smaller than if it's an average of 10 sets per muscle. So if you want a program you can do for a longer time that gets you good gains, but doesn't front load the fatigue like crazy, and then 3 weeks later you're like, time to deload again, don't start with 20 sets. Start with 10. And then you'll get more weeks to get good progressions and a higher quality of training. Does that mean it's categorically better? No. If you deload and wash away the fatigue, you go back into it, no problem. So that's not a real big concern. But I don't think a lot of people like deloading any more often than they have to. And if you just go right to the crazy shit, you start this big fatigue wave that crashes onto you really fast, and you have to pull back again. So you push and pull and push and pull. I'm more of a fan of just not having sex. No, wait, different discussion. And the idea that you ease into things that are difficult is kind of universal in biological systems anyway. So it's not like I'm saying anything super controversial. Does that make sense?
It does.
Kind of my whole trieste on that. Yeah.
It is essentially you making a safer bet on the account of you're not looking at missing out massively on gains if you spend a few weeks training with slightly less volume and then gradually building up. And there are maybe some potential upsides to that, but we're not talking about a night and day difference. If you're the one freak that can go back into it and you're fine, more power to you.
Totally. So I would say for folks listening, try both methods. Try starting at 5 sets or try starting at 2 or 3. And then just run your program open-endedly and see which one you like. You might be like, if you start at 2 or 3, like, got a pump, I got a little sore, I'm excited, I'm not overdoing it. A couple weeks later, you're really catching the drift. And listen, after you do that lead-in phase of like slightly lower volume escalating, you'll get right into your meat and potatoes phase. And because you've slowly built up your work capacity and recovery ability, you'll have weeks and weeks and weeks of training at that real high volume. There is no trade-off. You're not losing the ability to make gains. You're actually allowing yourself to do a longer program that gets you at least the same gains with a reduction in injury risk, less annoyance, less time spent to the gym, etc. So like with anything, I think a lead-in is a good idea. You go through your burn phase. At some point, you can't do the shit anymore. You deload, a little bit detrained, switch exercises, start with some lower bit of volume, and then you don't have to increase the volume, because some people will be like, why don't I just start with low volume and keep going? And I'm like, well, yeah, Pat can tell you about how that also works. But if you know that you're easily recovering, and you know the literature that, like, look, every muscle by itself can handle sets and sets and sets and still marginally gain you more, why not add a few sets? And if you don't want to, no big deal. So that's kind of my logical structure around that. I haven't heard too many people really push back on that and say, bullshit, and this is wrong for this reason. Is there direct literature saying volume cycling is superior? Absolutely not. But this is something that's been happening a lot lately in the last year or so. We went through this like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, where people had to redefine to people what evidence-based means.
Yeah.
Evidence-based means, at least according to Brad Schoenfeld and James Krieger and all those guys, that you use direct empirical evidence, indirect supporting evidence, theoretical supposition, practical experience, and conversations with athletes and coaches. And so, yes, there is no direct evidence that volume cycling works in a compelling way, but all those other ones are like, yeah, man, volume cycling is probably something you can try. And to me, that's good enough.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people, one, miss context. So they hear volume cycling and they're like, okay, it's either the default for everyone and the only way to progress or nothing. Plus, I think there's a bit of a FOMO going on with some people where they're like, but what if those 2-3 weeks are too low in volume or too whatever?
Yeah, that's true. Next time you're pulling out of your garage, just drift out that motherfucker like you're rally racing, because you need to get to that fucking restaurant as fast as possible. Don't slowly come out of your driveway. Don't warm up your engine. Just go.
As a BMW driver, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm not sure how it's related to...
You're the transporter? You're Jason Statham.
Pretty
I
much.
recognized
From
you.
Lidl, a discount. Jason Statham. Jason Stathamakis.
Nonsense. Greek things are typically better than British. I'm kidding. Brits.
I'm a British citizen as well, so you
really are
that.
Jason Statham then.
Excellent. So to wrap this up, because I think a lot of people have this idea, they forget that muscle growth takes time. And worst case scenario, by giving volume cycling a go, especially if you're an advanced individual who has been training for years and wants to absolutely maximize muscle growth, it is a strategy that at worst you may be like, oh, I started a bit too low, I was recovering too quickly, it was too easy. Next week, I upped my volume.
Not even in the next half week.
Yeah, exactly.
You do like push, legs, pull, nothing much happened. Add 2 sets to everything. Push, legs, pull.
Yeah.
So you can fix it real easy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching another Stronger by Science video. You experienced the renaissance of periodization, am I right? With volume cycling. And anything you'd like to see in future studies on volume cycling?
I mean, Dr. Eric Helms and I have been talking about a future study we'd love to see for a while, which is like kind of all variables equated and maybe even kind of crossover group design where like you do one thing for 4 weeks and then you do another thing and they switch groups. Like one group, this is just a
rough draft.
A very rough draft. The examples are kind of nonsense, but like one group does 3 sets, 3 sets, 3 sets over the weeks. One group does 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets over the weeks. And we measure direct hypertrophy for that, but like a lot of times direct hypertrophy is just not enough magnitude of change in short-term studies. We would measure things like fatigue perception. We would measure things like how much time people are spending in the gym, and we might find that you're actually able to spend a little bit less time in the gym. There was never that psychotic, crazy soreness and perception of insane effort. Fewer people dropped out of the group that started with 2 sets. Maybe we'll find something like that, or we'll find out that volume cycling is stupid and pointless, and we're just trying to be too fancy.
Nice. Hopefully, the PhDs can get to it at some point in the near future.
Do your jobs, people. Do research, whoever you are.
Until then, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.